1998. And he's a member of the Little Brothers of Jesus. That's the mob founded by Charles de Foucault, who lived from 1858 to 1916. So Coretto would have had the last 6 years with him. And that community was based on the spirituality of St. Francis. And Coretto's life, like that of Francis, was a combination of action and contemplation. And a lot of what I'm talking about today, I've come from a Franciscan organization, which is the Center for Action and Contemplation. So he wrote a book which he called I, Francis. And he speaks in Francis's voice. And he's combining the biography with imaginative stuff about what Francis might say to us today. And he described the experience with the hungry old wolf had been terrifying the people of the town of Gubbio and preying on their livestock, and they were terrified of him. And so Francis went out to meet the wolf, armed only with love. And the townspeople thought, well, that's the end of Francis, his wolf dinner. But what he was doing was considering the needs of both, the wolf and the people, always both. How do we bring them together? Reconciliation. And so what he saw was that this was an old creature, and it just couldn't chase wild animals anymore. They were too fast and too slick. And so he had to eat, so he came and got what he could. And but the people also need safety for themselves and for their animals. So how do you do that? So what Francis proposed to the people was that the wolf be given food each day. And the wolf agreed to leave their sheep and chickens alone. Now, what that means in terms of what actually happened, talking to the wolf or not, miraculous. So back then they would have liked a nice miracle like that. But probably it's just as simple as, you feed a creature, and it doesn't need to be vicious. Normally creatures are not vicious if they get what they need. And if it was going to be, and it's too old and tired to go chasing and biting people, and it didn't have to. But if they fed the wolf would be tamed in the sense that it was not going to attack. And then if the people did that and provided some sustenance for the wolf, they would be safe and the rest would be safe. So it was a simple enough option, but they hadn't thought about it. They went to the violence. They were going to come out with knives and clubs and kill the wolf, and the wolf was going to try to eat and was going to fight against those who were attacking it, and also would come around and kill a lamb or something at night. So, it was ecology and peace. Important. And what he said, what Coretto wrote in the voice of Francis was this: "No, brothers and sisters, I was not afraid to meet with the wolf, not since I had experienced the fact that my God is the wolf's God too." There's his ecology coming through. Nothing left out. So what's extraordinary in that incident is not that the wolf grew tame, but the people of Gubbio grew tame. And it was quite simple. A bit of bread and porridge, maybe some meat. And there you have it, the poor old wolf. It's stylized. So, the miracle of love, to discover that all creation is one. Flung out into space by a God who is a lover, Father in the sense of the origin, the source of all being. If you present yourself as God does, unarmed and peaceably, that's interesting. As a God unarmed and peaceful, creation will recognize and meet you with a smile. No, we go to violence. So that's the principle of non-violence, Coretto said, and I want to recommend it to you with all the enthusiasm I can command. Okay. Are these points? Fear. Fear. 30 times in the Gospels, Jesus recorded, do not fear. Fear not, little flock. Be not afraid. So what do? We fear. You can't have trust if you fear the other. You can't have peace if you don't have trust. We say a lot, let's have justice and peace. I think that's in the wrong order. I think we have to have love. That karadia love, listening to the whole person. Then we will be just. And that will be mutual. And if we've got justice, love and justice, we will have peace. We won't have anything to fight about. So love, justice, then peace, rather than peace and justice. It's a small point, but it's the way I think about it. Non-violence means destroying fear. Now, this is a church in Punjab in Pakistan that was burnt out by people who feared, by fanatics. It's a group called Tehreek-e-Labbaik, and photographed there by the gentleman Fayez Hussein. But they destroyed the church, which was a significant act coming from fear of Christians and hatred. But worse than that, they burned 60 houses of Christians, which is where they live. So they could get along without coming to the church until it was rebuilt in their own houses. The destruction, I've seen photographs of that too, and the destruction was terrible. But people do. They just didn't need to do it. But this is why I, Francis, tell you this once again. Learn to conquer fear, as I did that morning when I went out to meet the wolf with a smile. That's Coretto talking again. By conquering myself, I conquered the wolf. By taming my evil instincts, I tamed those of the wolf. So he's dealing with himself first, says. Not looking and saying, what's the problem? It's a big problem with ecology today, really, in the sense that people say, oh, things are going wrong in the earth, we have to fix it. There'd be nothing wrong with the earth unless we did it. So we have to fix ourselves. The earth will be okay. So even a lot of ecologists miss the point. Old air coming through. Okay. My courage had established peace. He had to go out and actually do it because, again, as we were talking before, when it comes to facing death, we don't know. You might have a good idea, you might have a lot of hope, but we don't know. And so it takes courage. And he says you can deduce the rest by yourself. So just think what would happen if one day our nation's leaders became non-violent and took the huge sums of money they spend on defending themselves against fear and use them to help the people of whom they are now afraid. What if we started giving instead of taking, like that example I used before with the cardboard bits, where these nations with money looked and said, what do you need? What do you need? How can we help? What if China was to do that? They would find that they became loved. They'd find that they'd have a whole lot of help. They'd find that if their water supply of these great rivers that feed their people started to run out as the glaciers in in up in the Himalayas become emptied out, that there be other nations saying, what can we do? And be willing to when if they're asked to help with climate change, for instance, would be much more willing. Be something in it for themselves, because they don't want China trying to send 100 million people to their shores, which may be the long-term plan. But anyway, it would be wonderful if we could just start to give. What has President Trump done with international aid? And said, oh, you don't have to worry about that, the tariffs will help. But what's happening in the small countries now, there's an article in the paper this morning about one small African country, Lesotho, where the tariffs, they've been hit by a big tariff. And the way Trump described them as a country nobody's ever heard of, 35% tariff, and it's destroying the whole industry there, mainly clothing industry. So give instead of take. So Francis with his friend, you will know peace then, says Carlo. Is that too much to hope? Perhaps someone is listening to me, using the voice of Francis. To whomever it is, I, Francis, say, be brave. Be brave. Do it. Don't just fear what might happen if you do it. If it's what should be done, do it. Okay. We come to the lepers. So Francis with the leper, and Francis with the leper on the left. And it's a confronting picture. And I put it there, I thought about it, and then I thought, no, we need to realize that this was not an easy thing for him to do, particularly as St. Francis had this huge fear of leprosy. This, fanatical fear of it. And Pope Francis there with a real alive leper rather than in a painting. And it is confronting to be able to do that. I don't know if I could. Certainly not easily. Okay. So we go on with the story. The Lord gave me, Brother Francis, us to begin doing penance in this way, as I think from his testimony. When I was in sin, it seemed too bitter for me to see lepers. Now, if you take that word in sin, the sin being diabolos, the pushing apart, when I was pushing them apart from me and other people apart from me. So when I was in sin, it seemed impossible to see lepers, to even acknowledge their presence. I'm thinking of Trump in this description of Lesotho, a country nobody knows about. Wipe them. And the Lord led me among them, and I showed mercy to them. And when I left them, what had seemed bitter to me was turned into sweetness of soul and body. And afterwards I delayed a little. Like St. Paul, he had to go out probably for several years. Jesus had to go out into the desert. It's not easy. You've got to come around to this. It needs that contemplative space. I delayed a little, and then I left the world. Yes, his testament, right at the start, lines 1 to 3. So when he said he left the world, though, he was not talking about creation. And the world, the flesh and the devil, Paul uses the word sarx in the Greek, S-A-R-X. And so it's not the physical world, it is the world of business and corruption and politics and, the sin of the world, the sinful systems that push apart, that control, that dominate. So that's the world. Yes, Dorothy Day didn't pull punches. Rotten, decadent system. New York, Tammany Hall. Who's giving up on the usual things like that, payoffs, constraints, rewards for business as usual, people getting let off because of politics, people being thrown out because of politics, people, justice not being done because of politics, choosing to live in the largest queendom of all, the reign of God. Pray and actually mean your kingdom come, we must also be able to say that other, my kingdoms go. So where we live in that sin, as Francis is saying, they we come to realise that. And so Francis and Claire's first citizenship was always, in every case, elsewhere. You can take a look at Philippians 3:20, which ironically allowed them to live in this world with joy and freedom, because the two are actually one. So they were in the reign of God while in this environment. Joy and freedom. Remember, joy is not always happiness. That can be a bit of frippery and a bit surface. Joy is a deep, deep thing. Because one knows it's love, one knows we are redeemed, we know that we're in the hands of God. Okay, so that quote from Dorothy Day was in her From the Catholic Worker on Pilgrimage, and she wrote it in 1956. You can get it online. catholicworker.org, Dorothy Day /articles. And it's article 710. Okay. So Francis's ascetic sense, so central to his personality, had been transformed, even inverted. The startled veteran sensed himself by God's grace and no power of his own remade into a different man. So this experience with the leper and lepers in general, because he spent a time in a leprosarium, was more important actually than the taking off of the clothes. This was a much more fundamental change. So that was important, but this was the real radical change. God's grace, no power of his own, remade into a new person. The old man had gone. They talk about that in old-time theology. You had to put aside the old man and take on the new, which is dying to self and being with God. The sins which had been tormenting him seemed to melt away. And again, that stuff where he's pushing other people away, tormenting him. And he experienced a kind of spiritual rebirth, a kind of healing. And not long after this encounter, this encounter later accounts from his brothers, maybe their allegory. Francis was walking down a road and met one of these same letters, and he embraced the man in his arms and kissed him. That was in the picture before. And Francis' spiritual nightmare was over. He'd found peace. And that, what I'm quoting there, comes from Augustine Thompson in his book Francis of Assisi, a New Biography, published by Cornell University in 2012, pages 16, 17. Okay. That's the core, yeah. So again, like St. Paul, he had to earn his keep. And he did it there in a place where he never thought he'd be. So different from his privileged former life. So a reorientation, all right, dramatic, personal, and of course it brought forth the fruit. by doing it, he was able to recognize that he was receiving it. This is Jimmy Yeo, and as you can see, that the effect of leprosy is not attractive. But if you look beyond the face, you've got a person who's experiencing the feelings of everybody else and the thoughts, but who's very likely being completely rejected and treated with horror because of the way he now looks. So it's that respect to look again, to look more deeply. So as he did all those things, treated them as human beings, not as refuge, he changed. They changed him for the better. And he learned to value that, and therefore learned to value them. We talk about that cardia being the mind and the heart and the gut. It just didn't change his thinking, causing delight, but spiritually and viscerally in the gut and physically. So deep within each of us lives a leper and a wolf. And so these stories did happen historically with Francis, but first they operate in the soul, in the experience, in the taking on of life. Whether he, the story of the wolf is talking to the wolf, as I said, it's possibly just the way he treated the animal. But it's worth a thought, isn't it, that we have these things within us that we need to pay attention to. What's the wolf in me? When do I want to rend and tear? When do I want to howl? When do I want to hunt? When do I feel ugly and abused and set aside and of no value? Can I pay attention to these things in me? Again, that idea of having the persons and the personality. Here are two of them, possible ones. To talk to them. Where are you coming from? What are you doing? To find peace in that. So, encounter and embrace. And if we haven't been able to do that, kiss many lepers, tame too many wolves, what about the possibility of that being true? That we haven't made friends, haven't treated as persons, those persons within our personality. We need to dance with our wolf. We need to name the leper and speak with it. We need to nurse and tend to wounds. We need to name the wolf and tame him by forgiveness. Okay.
This is kind of like a definition of a integral person, a person who lives with integrity. That person integrated all those personalities within himself.
Yeah. Well, integer, of course, is one. Yeah, so making one. That's our destiny. We do that within ourselves. We're also ready, making ourselves ready to become one with God again. Sacred unity. Our destiny. Come back. Having left in the garden, metaphorically, come back to the garden and through the Garden of Gethsemane, probably. It will not be done easily because it is not an easy thing to do. We can't just shout, Lord, Lord. It's got to be real. To make it real, we have to go through the valley of the shadow of death. So inner and outer freedom is another heading, another topic. Look at both. Because she was a rich girl. She was a noble's daughter. And when she decided to climb the ladder down, that family was not happy, sent the brothers actually to physically remove her from the convent. And Francis had to confront them. He had to put her into a convent because she wasn't allowed to be outside in those days. Nuns were all enclosed. So that restricted her actions. But their prophecy was the way they lived. So I keep saying it's the orthopraxy rather than the orthodoxy. So Francis and Clare were not so much prophets by what they said as by what this radical system critiquing way that they lived their lives. They found both inner and outer freedom by structurally living, as I've said before, on the inside of the both church and society, on the edge of the inside. So they were inside the church, they were inside society, but they were pushing the boundaries because those boundaries were rigid and unthinking and bounded by fear and hatreds and violence and all of those sorts of things. So they were pushing. And too often people seek either in or out of freedom, but they seldom find both. Out of freedom, well, I go with, I'll kill people in the concentration camp. Orders are orders. Befehl. Inner freedom, maybe, but can't live in society. Francis was able to do both. So they had an agenda for making things right. The lifestyle was outside the system of production and consumption, which is the meaning of our vows of poverty. It's not to have nothing, but to live outside that system, the sinful system, and conscious identification with the marginalised society, what we call the preferential option for the poor. And that's the communion of saints pushed to its outer edge. All part of the communion of saints, every single person. But they've been pushed out, marginalised, and to go there, to be there. And so we say then we don't do acts of peace and justice. Instead of our life is itself peace and justice. So it's not something we do, like I was saying before in ecology. It's not a matter of saying, oh, we've got to fix the earth. We have to become balanced in ourselves. We have to fix ourselves. So we make our life itself peace, love, and justice and peace. I change that order again. If love brings us to a state of justice and therefore peace, then wherever we go, that's what we bring. Because it is us. It's a small place, but it's a sufficient place. We can't do everything. As my novice master told me one day, go wash an elephant if you want to do something big. So God runs the universe. We just take our place. And that is sufficient. I thought of Maximilian Kolbe, in a concentration camp. And the guy was being selected out because of something that somebody did. And he had a family. And Kolbe said, I'll take your place. Small and sufficient place. So, That living on the edge of the inside means building on the solid tradition, not, as John Henry said before, the later stuff that calls itself tradition of original sin. We have so much in the church which is junk, and people say, oh, it's tradition. And it's 11th century or 3rd century or 5th century or something, and it's just 10th century, Middle Ages. So, no, it isn't. It's just something that's sort of come in and we hold on to it. And we do it from a new and creative stance, which is on the edge. So I'd say changing that viewpoint. Go out to where the people on the edge are seeing things. And they see it differently. And we can't be co-opted then, as happens when we're right in the middle of society and affected by it, and we're earning our keep from it, and we've got our prestige from it, and we've got our possessions from it. We have our power over other people from it rather than power with. And then we can be co-opted for purposes of security, possessions, prestige, and the illusions of power. And that's what happens so much in society. People are co-opted into that. Whereas if you come to another viewpoint, you can see the reality of that it is actually unreal. A world we create amongst ourselves. People who live on in war games, for instance, the world's not real. People who have to have all sorts of operations and injections and stuff to stay pretty, that's not real. The singers and groups that you don't see so much now, but when we had CDs and records, you see the photo on the front and you look at them, that's a complete pose. Complete pose. It's not real. It's not who they are. Face to the world. So get real. Francis did, and Claire did. So ecclesia, the church. So they placed themselves outside the system of not just, or outside the middle, to the edge of not just social production and consumption, but the church as well. They went to the edge of the church and say, what are we doing? Let's take another point of view of this, rather than being in the whole flow of things, where the idea of going to a seminary for a priest was to study well and be considered very bright and be sent to Rome, and where they could be get degrees and doctorates of divinity and not worth the paper they're written on, and in many cases. And then if they're lucky to be given made a titular bishop, so that they get an office in the Vatican, and they get there, and then they'll be made an archbishop in charge of consistory of some kind of some area of the whole thing, and then be made a cardinal, and never having been actually in a parish, that sort of thing. Take a look at that and say, come on, get real. You can't have church being run by people like that. And it's politics. When I was in Rome and I saw what was going on there, I thought, this is just like Yes Minister. And Yes Prime Minister. It was. It was. That's a marvellous show because it was so damn accurate, making fun of it, of course, by exaggerating here and there, but not too much. And in the Vatican, there's one priest there who's staying with us in Via della Maglianella. He worked in the Vatican. He said, they haven't heard about women yet. Haven't heard about women yet. And then he looked at us and he said, they haven't heard about brothers either. We're people who polish the shoes for the priests. They hope Okay, so Frank wasn't a priest, nor were they originally, but of course I said they moved away from that. They became priests mostly. They've still got brothers. It happened not so long ago that the Yarra Theological Union or the monastery there at that site, which Yarra Theological Union is using part of the buildings, is um, the rector, the boss, was a brother, not a priest, even though they were priests in the community. That was a big change commented on. But that happened a few decades ago, not all that long. So the spirituality, they weren't earning or seeking worthiness or career or status or all that stuff. Or divine favour. They knew that God loved them, so there's no need to seek all of that. Tradition of holy fools that the Desert Fathers and Mothers had in the Eastern Church. And they offered that to the very organised and efficient Western Church. Very organised, very efficient, big structures. And you do need a certain amount of structure if you've got a church of 1.2 billion people. Anyway. So the most part, the path they offered has been ignored or misunderstood. And I've talked about it. I think most of us prefer quid pro quo, retributive justice, rather than restorative justice. But those who are formed by the gospel should know better. So, who was the original April Fool? Who got that name? Oh, I thought that was a dead certainly answered. One Jesus of Nazareth was the original April Fool. What an idiot, getting himself, when he could have cleared out, getting himself crucified in April. So, I thought I'd put in here a bit of stuff. 4 causes of Aristotle. Efficient cause, formal cause. Know any others? Material cause. And the final cause. That everything that's done, so a sculpture, for instance, has the formal cause. We're going to make a sculpture. Material cause is a lump of marble. The efficient cause is a person with the chisel. And the final cause is this lovely statue. So that's the way Aristotle put it. Okay. So he said that they're all necessary, none can be excluded. So I used that example. But our 4 prime business concepts are those. And in our business now, these 2 are becoming less and less, for a long time anyway, they were less and less valuable. It was efficiency and growth. And still they put that on there, efficiency and growth. Leave out the servants and the maintenance. They talk about that a lot more now. Off service, we've got great service because they have to only. But sometimes it's just lip service. And it's not really what is claimed on the advertisements. So we'll get to the point soon. Efficiency. Quite often it's put on its own. And the most efficient business probably ever was Treblinka. They killed 3 million people in 17 months. Harvested all the gold teeth, all the clothes, all the rest of it. Yeah. Stangl, Franz Stangl, was it? The guy who... and he was interviewed in prison by this Hungarian lady, Gita Sereni. Could you not have changed that No. This was the system. Bert had invented it. And because it worked, it was irreversible. Because it worked. It was irreversible. He was proud of it. No, we disposed of all these people in all this time. It was wonderful work. And she couldn't get through to him at all. He was completely caught up in that efficiency. And we also have growth. Growth. They talk about growth all the time, don't they? Growth. But what sort of growth? Pollution in the air, in our rivers, in our streams, huge numbers of people, growth in AI. So radical Christianity stays out of the system, so they cannot control our breadth of feeling and thinking and loving and living out love and justice and peace. So when they use that term, the world, we've talked about this a bit before, they didn't mean the earth, which they're referring to the idolatrous systems and institutions. They're idolatrous because they set themselves up as God. They cannot be gainsaid, and also people give over everything in order to serve them. Your God, your true God, your real God is the one you give everything apart to serve. And say, oh yes, Jesus is my God, God of Jesus is my God. You need to look at what you put everything aside for. And that's they're self-referential and always dying away. And that's in Paul has something to say about that to the Corinthians, because they were in the midst of all that stuff for sure. A fairly corrupt trading port, tough people. Okay. He's a patron saint of ecology. And ecology comes from ecos nomos, which is, ecos is a home, logos is the meaning, the word concerning the home. And then we have economy, which is ecos nomos, the home and the right ordering of the home, the nomos, the normalizing of it. So it's not so far from our English. But when you look at that, you say, which comes first? Because our world says economy comes first and ecology comes second. And Francis would have said, no, other way around. And if you look at it, how can you possibly right order the home if you don't understand the home? And of course, the home is our small blue planet and our environment and our church and our businesses and our homes. Yeah. So we know this, I think. In Bonaventure again, Christ is something in common with all creatures. With the stone he shares existence, with plants he shares life, with animals he shares sensation, and with the angels he shares intelligence. And I meant to bring up a thing I read yesterday about the man who's head of the institute in Ireland where I spent a year, Mount Oliver Institute, Tom Hamill, who died a couple of years ago. And this thing had something like that. It was a wonderful description, but I've forgotten it. So he's trying to give, Bonaventure is trying to give theological weight to the deep experience Francis was the first Christian to call animals and elements and even the forces of nature by familial names. So I went backwards there. That wasn't good. Fully at home. Again, that word real. Endless, dynamic, and operative symbols of the real. Heaven on earth, a theatre and training ground. That's where we are, and the things around in which we can practice making one and being in one with and learning from and valuing and loving and being peaceful and just. And that's that Jesus thing. What you choose now, the kingdom of God, heaven is around you and within you. You need to be open to it. Yep, precisely this. Not later, now. We can't jump over the world or its woundedness. Love God through, in, and with. Okay. So, I've got 10 slides to go, and that's too many because we're at time. So can we finish with a prayer? You want to say it to yourselves or say it out loud? Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is dying that we are born to eternal life. Sort of encapsulates what we've been saying, doesn't it? Yeah. God empties God's self into creation, and then we humans spend most of the history creating systems to control and subdue that creation for our own purposes and profit, reversing the divine pattern. Okay. So Mirabai Star also has a prayer. I'll just put it up as we finish. Okay. She wrote that in St. Francis of Assisi, Brother of Creation, which is published by Sounds True in 2007 and 2013.